You have joined us today for our June webinar, Bright Futures Healthy Skin, Tools for Educators to Promote Skin Health in the Classroom and Beyond. I'm Erin Augustin, Outreach Program Manager for Early Childhood Health Consultation. We're so glad to have you join us today. The Early Childhood Health Consultation Program is a free service to promote best health and safety practices in early childhood settings throughout Wisconsin. Our partners are the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families and the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Human Ecology. We're grateful for the support of the Preschool Development Grant and the Roots and Wings Foundation. Our mission is to support Wisconsin's early childhood education providers in addressing health-related concerns and offering guidance on best health and safety practices. The ECHC program acknowledges the American Indian tribal nations across Wisconsin and commits to offering customized support to each tribal community. We offer general guidance on best practices for health and well-being in early childhood setting. We do not offer individual care for a particular child. Today's agenda will include an introduction, central content, Q&A, and closing remarks. If you're interested in continuing education credit with the Wisconsin Registry, please enter your information in the post-webinar survey by Monday, June 9th at 5 p.m. The link will be included in the chat at the end of the event. You'll also receive an email following the event that will include the slides and a recording of today's presentation. Your attendance will be reflected in your online Wisconsin Registry portal within 2 weeks. This will serve as your verification of attendance. Please use the chat feature to send messages to the host and panelists or everyone. If you'd like to submit a question, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom panel. We're pleased to be able to offer Spanish interpretation services today. You'll need to join in the interpretation channel, which you can find by clicking on More in the bottom panel and searching for that globe icon. If you joined through your cell phone, you'll find these features at the bottom of your screen. We're pleased to present Lisa Arkin, MD, Director of Pediatric Dermatology at the UW School of Medicine and Public Health, and Associate Professor of Dermatology and Pediatrics. She is joined by her colleague, Dr. Allison Miller, Pediatric Dermatology Fellow at the UW School of Medicine and Public Health. And now I'd like to kick it off to Dr. Nipesh Navsaria to get us started today.
Thank you so much, Erin. Really appreciate it. Coming to you from a small library, public library in Johnson Creek, which, if you're in the area, it's a lovely little place to visit. I'm so excited about today's presentation. Skin is something that we see all the time and having, as the most visible part of each other. And I'm really excited to be able to spend some time talking about how we can keep little kids' skin as healthy as possible. So with that, I see slides are coming up here, and I will pass it on to Doctors Miller and Arkin. Thank you again for being here.
Great. Great, guys. We are so excited to be here, and we really are so appreciative for the opportunity to talk about our favorite thing, which is the skin, which we literally talk about day in and day out, and I love the opportunity to talk with you guys all. So like the great introduction that Dr. Navsaria and Erin gave for us, really the goal today is to provide you guys with a little bit of a toolbox and a landscape more or less behind the reason of why the skin is so important and what this means for like opportunities for you guys to learn about going forward, to feel confident in helping kids stay safe within the classroom and beyond. Always feel free to chime in.
Allison, if I could, if
Yep.
I could break in for 1 second, I think if you speak just a little slower, it'll help our interpreter.
Sounds great. Yes, I get a little excited and then I think I talk about a million miles a minute. So I appreciate you guys. All right, you guys. So today we are going to be talking about the largest organ of your body. And we have brief overviews, which are kind of what I highlighted already. The goal today is to really understand the overall structure of the skin as it really relates to function and why this matters, especially when we think about sun protection as well as gentle skincare regimens overall. And really, the goal overall for you guys today is to really understand the why behind this and help you feel confident in the way that you counsel families kind of going forward and managing kiddos in your rooms. So, keeping it down to the basics, when we think about the overall structure of skin, we really think about the skin in three main layers. Each of these layers maintain a very vital function to help us maintain our normal homeostasis balance and really helps the way that we interact with the world around us. From a basic standpoint, we really break the skin down into our three main layers of the epidermis, which is the outer layer of the skin, the dermis, which is that mid layer, and then the kind of more subcutaneous fat layer, which is the deeper layer of the skin. And all of this compose very vital functions and very vital structures that help us, again, interact with the world around us. So, really, like we said, and I think it's pretty cool, we're in an era where we are actually dealing with the true largest organ in your body, and it holds such vital function in so many different facets outside of just the way it looks on our skin. Right from the top surface, just because it is that physical interaction with the outside world around us, our skin plays really vital function when we think about the barrier protection and that total armor that we have as as we interact with the world around us. It serves as that protection against the environmental changes around us, our environmental allergens, and a lot of these other important factors. On top of it, too, our skin holds a large immunological barrier with the world around us as well. And so this is oftentimes our first line of defense when we think about, again, interacting in this world, the way that we come into contact with allergens, stimulation of inflammation, and all these other pathways that really is vital to our overall health. On top of it, we have great structures like we just saw on our last slide to help us regulate the temperature around us. So the skin is the area that we hold a lot of our eccrine glands or our sweat glands that help us regulate temperature. So if you see those kiddos in the heat of summer who are sweaty and hot, your skin is that barrier protection or that structure itself to help maintain that homeostasis to prevent overheating or hypothermia in many cases. Outside of that, your skin also does a lot for injury repair. So if you fall down, scrape your knee, it is a huge intricate way that our skin works together to really help repair the skin overall and again keep it healthy. And then on top of it, it also has many vital structures like our Merkel cell receptors, all of these wonderful sensory nerve related receptors that again help us maintain hemostasis with temperature control, sensory control with the world around us, and also have really important implications when we think about the mechanism of itch and many other pathways related to skin. And last but not least, which is probably one of the more important factors too, is it's really important in the way that we display ourselves and the way that we feel with our sense of confidence and the way that we interact with the world around us when we think about the overall appearance of our skin. When we think about skin, and especially skin of color, it's actually a very fascinating mechanism because really all skin for the majority of cases is the exact same. One of the major structures that we see within the skin, and you can see highlighted with this little tentacle spider channel here in the deeper structure of the skin, are called melanocytes. And these are our major pigment producing cells. Interestingly, across all patients with skin of color and variable skin of color, from the lightest and fairest of fairest to the darkest of darkest and the whole spectrum in between, on average, we carry about the same number of melanocytes within our skin. But really, what makes the difference in the coloration and the pigmentation and the depth of that pigmentation in our skin is actually how much melanin is produced by those individual melanocytes. And so when we think about the differences, there's actually not much difference. It's more of the pigment and the amount of pigment related to this melanin in the skin. But all of those other structures hold a lot of the same similarities. And then when we think about these mechanisms, and this is really laying the foundation for why a lot of these things like sun protection are important, our whole body system works in a very intricate way. We have this system where we go through these DNA channels, where DNA I like to think of as that written script that really is a part of all of the cells in our body. This is the script that carries that transcript for us to then translate into a product that allows us to create proteins that are truly vital for all mechanisms of function within our body. And we have a very intricate system in helping to repair this DNA when there's damage, making those proteins to make sure they're proteins that are functioning appropriately and well to really contribute. And our skin is a really important factor that uses a lot of these mechanisms because again, it's one of those first lines of defense and it can interact with a lot of things that can cause injury. And so we really need an intricate repair system in place. This is a mechanism that is not unique to the skin and happens all over our body, but in the skin, it's really important, especially when we think about things like sun exposure and sun protection. And so when we
Dr. Miller, if I could ask you to slow down again, the interpreter is having such a hard time keeping up with all the great information.
I am so sorry. Okay. Yeah. Please feel free to keep chiming in.
Thank
Uh,
you.
you guys. So when we think about sun exposure, sun exposure is related to what's called ultraviolet light radiation, or UVR is what you will see in the slides coming forward. When we are exposed to sunlight damage or ultraviolet light radiation, this ultimately can create DNA damage where we have this beautiful written script. And I think of it almost like puzzle pieces together that you cause injury to some of those puzzle pieces that makes it hard to put it back together. Again, thinking about that mechanism, our skin does a really great job of helping to recover, and we have a lot of these repair systems in place. But as you can think about, ongoing chronic exposure can lead to more DNA damage that ultimately can lead to complications down the line. That's really important and something that's really important at this stage for you guys to make a difference from the very start for families and their children. So to go into a little bit more detail about sunlight and sun exposure, our sunlight exists on, or just sunlight in general, it exists on a large spectrum of different wavelengths of light. The spectrum of wavelengths really depends on the length of that wavelength, and so the sunlight around us that we're exposed to is composed of both UVA, UVB, as well as visible light, all within this spectrum. This really matters because we think about what parts of this spectrum can cause over time with chronic exposure. And so for things like UVB light, we have actually found very high associations with a lot of DNA damage that can result in things that lead to things like sunburn and subsequently the risk of skin cancer development down the line. As you can see on the graphic to the left, UVA does play a piece in this puzzle, but UVB exposure is the biggest risk when we think about the risk of skin cancer and sunburn development. Although less importantly to your 2-year-old that you're interacting with on a daily basis, but we do think about things, chronic sun exposure early on can play a huge role when we think about things like photoaging down the line. And again, although it may not seem so important to them at this point in time, it's a huge difference that you can make from the very start and something that we can start to implement at any point in time in our life. Compared to skin cancer risk, photoaging or the ability of our skin to kind of cause some of those aging changes over time, we see it related more to again still UVB, but a little bit more higher association with things as well as UVA light and visible light, which is really hard. And visible light is something that we're even exposed to not just in the sun, but with our day-to-day interactions with just the fluorescence lights that we live under. On top of it, it's really important to think about within the sun's exposure spectrum, dyspigmentation, or where we get pigmentary changes on our skin, really is a huge risk factor as well, again, across that spectrum, with visible light playing a really important piece as well.
So I was just going to add, it's not just skin cancer we worry about, it's all of the effects that are damaging the DNA, which are your building blocks. And so when we look back at that initial kind of dogma that your building blocks called DNA are transcribed into RNA and then proteins, and proteins do all of the work of your body. the sun is interrupting it at the DNA level. So very, very early. And so everything Dr. Miller is going to talk about is about protecting that earliest event, which has a cascade of changes, not in a 2-year-old, but over decades and decades of time.
Great. Awesome. And again, this feeds into more this thought of chronic exposure or ongoing exposure to that UVA damage or that UVB, the whole spectrum of light damage over time. We know that ongoing exposure, and again, the difference that you can make early on to change the practices for kids going forward is going to be really important, especially when we think about the risk of skin cancer development. And so UVB exposure has been directly linked to an increased risk of skin cancer development across all types of skin cancer. And so this includes our basal cell skin cancers, our squamous cell skin cancers. These fall in a bucket of what we call non-melanoma skin cancers. They are very tied to the sun and sun exposure chronically over time. It also is directly linked to the risk of melanoma, which is more of the worrisome skin cancer in the skin, as this has a higher chance of doing more dangerous things over time. It has been estimated that about 1 in 5 Americans will develop a skin cancer in their lifetime. And so, again, making some of these habit changes early on is going to be really important to prevent that ongoing exposure. And skin cancer is not unique to just individuals who are fair skin. And so I think this is a common misconception that a lot of people have. Anyone can get a skin cancer at any point in time. Knowing that patients with skin of color have a little bit more melanin in their skin, it is somewhat a level of protection, but it doesn't mean that they're immune to the risk of that DNA damage that, again, is that building block that can lead to these more downstream effects. So they're protected, but the risk is not 0%. What we've also seen over time too is patients with skin of color, if they get a skin cancer, it's oftentimes more diagnosed or it's identified at a much later stage, which oftentimes mean it's harder to treat. There's a higher chance that it has gone elsewhere outside of the skin. So again, something really important to protect the skin overall. Outside of skin cancer, we have also seen direct links to the number of moles that kids can get over time related to their UV exposure. And so, really, this is a really cool way that you can make a difference, again, from the very start in the total number of acquired moles that kids can get over time, again, by implementing really good sun protection early on and with consistent use. They've definitely seen high associations with those kids with all of the freckles, like in our photo here, but they've also seen the same effect in all individuals across the board, whether they're the fair skin type or not.
I was just going to add one more little piece to that, Dr. Miller, which is that melanin is your armor. It protects you from DNA damage. So if you have a darker skin tone, your risk for overall skin cancer is lower, but it's also the body's reaction to damage. So the tan or the development of freckles is a sign that your body has experienced enough DNA damage to trigger more melanin to protect itself. So there really is no healthy tan because it's a sign of damage. And that explains why kids who have more freckles, who have seen more damage, also have more moles and likely increased risk over their lifetime.
That's such a great point because I feel like it's the misconception where I grew up in the era where my mom said, get that base tan so you're protected throughout the sun. But there is no such thing because that is actually DNA damage, like Dr. Arkin was saying, in the skin. And so there's no level of protection. And you should really try to maintain the same color and the same tone of skin that your skin is at over the like darkest of winter months throughout the entire time period throughout the year to really know you're preventing that damage. All right. And I know we touched on this briefly, but UV exposure is directly linked to the way that our skin ages over time. And so in dermatology, again, later on in life in our adult populations, we know that we counsel families and patients that photoaging, the reason is one, two, and three is sun exposure over time. And it's that direct chronic exposure that, again, we can make a huge difference.
So it's not the blistering sunburn that gets you aging. It's the chronic, everyday, low-level sun from being outside. Are you
Yeah, you,
Are
you
you
can go. Go
gonna
ahead.
need
No,
it?
you go. Go
Okay.
ahead.
So this gentleman on the right actually was published in the New England Journal now probably 12 or 13 years ago. And he was a truck driver for more than 25 years. And what you can see in the photo is that his whole left side of the face is wrinkled, thickened, actually more atrophic than the right. If you compare the right, his right eyelid is actually elevated compared to the left. And that is because as a truck driver, all of the visible light and the ultraviolet A and B light passes onto the left side of your face. So this just shows the effects of that chronic exposure without protection over, 2+ decades.
And then on the bottom, they actually did this really cool overview through our American Academy of Dermatology, where they use this UV filter for patients across the spectrum. And so I tried to include a little bit of the earlier spectrum. And to Dr. Arkin's point, this is a kiddo who's early on in life who has had some sun exposure. You can see his freckling pick up really nicely in the UV filter to know that there is already some starts of some DNA damage. And then on the across the spectrum, so a patient who has seen more of that chronic exposure over time, how exuberant the like dyspigmentation you can see underneath the UV filter is. And so this again is not the sunbathing beach vacations all the time. This is the day-to-day exposure that we can make a really huge difference in. Photo aging can look at many facets. So like we talked about with the gentleman on the right-hand side here, you can also see a lot of like blood vessel development, those wrinklings, a lot of dyspigmentation over time as well. So I know we've kind of hit on this already, but UV exposure really matters for you as an educator, more or less because pediatric patients or children are at such an important point in their life. They have actually shown that a quarter of lifetime UV radiation exposure is accrued early on in life. So within those first 20 years of life. And again, the need for protection is really during this time, most importantly.
So it's not that you're going to see photo aging in a 2-year-old. It's just that what they get at 2 is going to be paid for the 40+ years until you see the damage.
And on top of that, pediatric children, I should say, sorry, pediatric, I have my medicine mind on right now. Children are so like at a such vulnerable population. One, because they're overall a very small size. And so their overall body surface to weight ratio is much, much higher compared to our adult patients. And then on top of it, they're going through their most critical periods, times of exponential growth because they're growing. They're in those phases where we know as growth happens, they're going through rapid DNA turnover that's dividing to create more proteins to help support their overall growth. And when that DNA is rapidly dividing, it's even more susceptible to that DNA damage, making it super important to make those differences from the start to prevent the long-term complications. So what can you guys do, right? What can we all do? So fortunately, we have had such an explosion, one on the education around sunscreen, but also kind of figuring out what sunscreens are going to be the best options available. And at the end of the day, it really does come down to whatever you guys are going to use and whatever you can help families in using is going to be better than no sunscreen. And so we like to highlight the different types of sunscreens available, and we have our preferred types of sunscreen. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to what you can get families to use and what's available. Right now, when we think about sunscreens, they tend to come in two flavors, is how we like to talk about them. One of them we describe as chemical sunscreens, and the other is going to be our physical or mineral-based sunscreens. Physical sunscreens or mineral-based sunscreens are going to be sunscreens that, if you look at the ingredient list, they will contain either zinc oxide or titanium dioxide. And this has actually been a newer kind of finding, I feel like, over time is we used to counsel families saying that we prefer physical sunscreens just for the fact that we thought, before we kind of got some more recent information, that they were acting as a direct physical barrier on the skin to fully reflect the light rays and not allow even any of the light rays to get in for potential absorption. We have shown, so new data over the last year has shown that a little bit of that UVR does get absorbed, even in the case of using physical sunscreens. But we do see much more of that scattered and reflected light effects when we're using these products to ideally reflect more of that absorptive process. But we have shown that we do absorb a little bit. In contrast, chemical sunscreens span across many, many different types of ingredients. The biggest thing is these are not the products that contain the zinc oxide or titanium dioxide. And what we have seen with the chemical sunscreens is that they tend to absorb that UVA radiation, that they then work to dissipate the UV radiation as heat off of the skin. Oftentimes, what I have found is that the chemical sunscreens families like a little bit more because they rub in a little bit nicer. They come in the lotion forms, the spray forms, all of these things. Whereas the physical blocking sunscreens, I feel like people have in their mind that knowledge of the lifeguard with the white nose. Those are like your like standard physical sunscreens. The good thing is the technology has gotten so much better over time. And so oftentimes now the formulations that they have made for the physical sunscreens tend to rub in a little bit easier. They're easier to use. We do try to have patients stay away from spray sunscreens just for the fact that, one, it's really hard to know you're getting even coverage when you're spraying it across the body. You'll notice there's some areas that really get that like middle spray where you're really getting a lot of the sunscreen on the skin in that area. But there tends to be really a lot of skip areas that you're missing when you're thinking about overall like even coverage and protection. The other piece of this is we really don't know what anyone's aerosolizing in. And so the way that people breathe in when you're aerosolizing the spray, there's always that potential risk. And so our often recommendations is trying to at least reach for a lotion-based product overall. When we think about the in and outs then of what sunscreen kind of is composed of, and when you look at the bottle, really kind of looking at the label to understand what your protection is, SPF feeds into a lot of this. So SPF stands for your sun protection factor, I should say. And really this is your protection factor in trying to understand how much is that product preventing sunscreen or sunburn for you. The like very science behind this is looking at this whole ratio of this MAD, which is your minimal MED, your minimal erythema dose, which is basically the minimum dose to create a little bit of redness in the skin. And so your SPF is actually the ratio of your minimal erythema dose of protected skin by that product over the MED of unprotected skin. And so really to simplify that in many ways, something like an SPF 30 ideally will give you 30 times more the protection for for yourself if you were not wearing any protection on your skin. You can see on the right-hand side, what they have really shown in studies is that once you get to SPF 30, you're gonna see pretty exponential coverage until SPF 30. After SPF 30, as you go to 45 and higher, you get additional coverage, but it's not nearly as like exponential or greater difference coverage than underneath 30. So you really want to choose at least a minimum of 30 when you're looking at the number on the bottle. The tricky thing, and I always want families to take this into account, is these statistics and these percent of coverage is really based on ideal application of sunscreen. And when we think about real world practice, no one is ever doing it to really what they looked at to achieve these numbers. And so, in many ways, even though science tells us based on the numbers of study, 30 is the minimum, we do sometimes recommend higher, knowing that not everyone's applying the recommended volume, the recommended amount of times when we think about the ideal applications that were studied in these cases. So it's something to keep in mind and something that we'll go through forward about ideal application. So really to simplify things, when you look at that bottle of sunscreen, when you go to the grocery store or when kids bring this into class, really you want to look for a couple main factors. One of them, you want to see if it says broad spectrum on the bottle, because what this is really telling you is that this specter, the sunscreen product, is going to cover both UVA and UVB light rays. Then you want to look at the number on the bottle. So again, ideally the minimum of 30 or higher, knowing again, are they going to be applying this the right way, the most appropriate way to obtain good coverage. And then sometimes we have some added mechanisms like water resistant can be advertised on the product. This is a little bit tricky because no sunscreen is completely waterproof or sweat proof. And so this really feeds into the knowledge that no matter what product you're using, you do have to reapply. And it gets into our recommendations of how we want to counsel and thinking about sun protection overall. So sun protection can come in many flavors, not just within sunscreen. When we think about the sunscreen, looking at those numbers, looking at some of those, like the broad coverage is really, really important. We always recommend families reapply sunscreen every 2 hours when they're outdoors. If they're, playing with the water tables or hopping in the pool, you want to reapply once you get out, knowing again that no sunscreen is water resistant. The other thing that can be really helpful is understanding how much sunscreen is actually recommended to apply. And for adults, which I don't even know if they've like related it to kids, adults, they kind of say like a shot glass size or a tablespoon of medicine. Sunscreen should be applied to the entire face. And then 2 to 3 tablespoons of sunscreen should be applied elsewhere to really maintain that ideal minimum coverage. The biggest thing is there's so much variability in individual sizes and how much skin they have like exposed to the sun. And so making sure you're getting a good even coverage is really, really important. There has been a lot of debate, and right now the recommendations are always to apply sunscreen for children 6 months and above. And this is always the question. It's not necessarily that sunscreen is not safe for children underneath 6 months, but again, knowing that kids are going through their biggest period of growth, development, you really want to protect those kiddos. And so oftentimes those recommendations are made to protect the children and to try to enforce families not exposing their younger children to sun over time. And so in these cases, there's other mechanisms we can reach for if you are going to bring a younger child out in the sun, or additional options for anyone that are really great additional ways to protect your skin.
And I was just going to add here that this ad campaign came from an Australian public health campaign because rates of melanoma in Australia were very, very high about 10 years ago. And so when we think about all of the mechanisms to reduce DNA damage and that sun exposure, this is not just looking at the sunscreens, it's saying put on your sun protective clothing, which we both have kids. We love that. We don't have to put 3 tablespoons of sunscreen while they're screaming at us. Slop on the SPF to their hands, their feet, their face. Slap on the sun protective hat. Keep them out in the shade in the hottest part of the day, which is 10 to 2, and then slide on those sunglasses. And I will say, when we think about public health campaigns to reduce mortality, this one has shown a dramatic decrease in new melanoma diagnoses in Australia. So it's an inexpensive, useful way that actually has reduced the diagnosis of melanoma in a high risk area. So we know these things work because of what the sun does to your skin at the highest risk period.
That is awesome. Yeah, and just like Dr. Arkin said, like our own families do that. So these are
Yeah.
our kids, our husbands, like these are super easy to use. Like slip on those sun shirts. You're gonna get great coverage. The sunglasses, all of those things can really make a huge difference.
If you go to any dermatology conference where there are spouses and children, we are all covered head to toe. All of the kids are wearing these, sun protective clothing, which is now widely available online and at big box stores and is very inexpensive.
And it's fun. Kids can explore, have a little creativity with all the fun shirts and clothing. And again, you guys can make a difference by also wearing these products because, doing that like modeling behavior can be really huge early on.
And I was just going to add that, right? We live in Wisconsin. Like spring and summer is the best time of year. As pediatric dermatologists, we want kids to have fun outside. We want them to be outside. We just want everyone to have all the tools to do it as safely as they can.
That's awesome. I wanted to just throw this in to let you guys know that there's really cool things out there outside of just what you can do at the first start of the hand, interacting with those individual patients. And so there's organizations like Impact Melanoma, which is based within the United States here, that actually works to help maintain or help implement providing sunscreen dispensers, like hand sanitizer dispensers, within the community, within schools, and within a bunch of organizations to, again, try to provide that opportunity for people to use these products and get additional protection. They have seen such a difference in the local communities. I know a lot of universities are starting to implement a lot of these, but it's a really cool way to bring in that opportunity at the very start and provide an equal opportunity for all children. The American Academy, so our big national dermatology academy, also does a really cool opportunity for sunshade grant programs. And so this is like an $8,000 grant opportunity for anyone caring for children or community groups that are caring for children or working with children underneath the age of 18 years. And so this is a really cool opportunity to help fund a shade structure to, again, allow kids to be able to do what they want to do, be outside in a very protected way. And we're happy to work with anyone if they want to work on one of these. All right, I know we're getting a little close on time, but I'm not going to speed up our voice. If we can't get through all the slides, that's okay. So feel free to jump in. Our last section is kind of shifting gears to focus a little bit more on why gentle skincare matters. And so if we look back at the structure of our skin, looking at that top layer of the epidermis especially, our normal skin, if you think about it, really in many ways looks like a great, healthy, impermeable brick wall. However, when your skin is dry, so all of that frequent hand washing we do, all of these other things that can break that skin barrier, we can lead to defects in that barrier. And so it's really easy for allergens like the fragrances in the air, the harsh soaps, detergents, all of these things to hit our skin to cause a lot of inflammation, irritation. Things like infection can easily get in because that shield effect of a strong brick wall barrier is broken. And so it can lead to other complications like infection and inflammation in the skin that can be really miserable for a lot of children and families. Is there anything else you want to add in this?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think 12 years into my career as a dermatologist, I remain incredibly humbled by how powerful this organ is. It is the immune system that we can see in some ways. I mean, think about all the kids who get a viral infection and then have a rash from it. And so not only is it your biggest barrier, but it's a live immune system that, as Dr. Miller said, is there to help fight off infection, to protect you from other kinds of infections. And um, it's a remarkably dynamic organ. When it gets dysregulated, it also has a lot of downstream effects. So that's another reason why we talk about this a lot, because it turns out it's your biggest, and we would say one of your most important
Important.
organs.
That's awesome. I'll let you take your slide too, because I know this is
Okay.
nice.
And this is a very complicated slide, but the only takeaway I want you to have is that when the skin barrier gets broken, there is a coupling between the immune system in your skin and the immune system in your blood. And in disorders like eczema, which is otherwise called atopic dermatitis, it's actually the barrier problem that drives the problem forward. And that is this idea that the more you scratch, the worse the eczema gets. There's a lot of nuanced immunology into why that happens, but it underscores how complex and beautiful a beast the immune system in your skin is and why protecting it is important.
Yeah, and into that, right? Like this can feed into this theory of the itch scratch cycle, or this concept, I should say, of the itch scratch cycle. As Dr. Arkin reiterated, like you itch the skin, it gets itchy, the eczema comes out, you get more breakdown of the skin, more things come in and irritate to cause more inflammation and irritation. And it's just this repetitive cycle. And we know that really matters for kids, especially because this feeds into so much when we think about circadian rhythm, their ability to get good night's sleep at night. You think about those kids who are itchy and dry and they can't fall into deep sleep because they're constantly scratching and itchy.
And they can't concentrate in
Yeah.
school. So all of the sleeping, the itching, attention deficit, hyperactivity, it turns out all of those things are linked because, as Dr. Miller said very early on, the skin has so many nerves which actually participate in this access of the sleep wakefulness. And it turns out it's very significant in terms of the way kids sleep and learn.
Mhm. And outside of that, too, it really feeds into this feeling of early on their understanding of them as humans and their ability to interact and feel those sense of differences, especially if they notice they can't, go outside in the heat and play basketball if their eczema's flaring or their skin's broken down, or just the way that they're like seeing their skin as it differs from other children. So we're going to go through a couple like debunking myths. One of them, or not even myths, but one important point is that moisturizers are very important to help repair that skin barrier and shut down that process from having to feed into all of those downstream cascades when we think about the inflammation system and our immunology going forward. When you look at trying to recommend moisturizers, this should be something that gets on your skin every day. Your better products are going to be things that come in a tub. So, a cream based or ointment based product is going to give you more moisture because these are oftentimes humectants that draw water into the skin compared to lotions. Lotions contain a high water content that oftentimes evaporates and it just doesn't give you much bang for your buck. We recommend really gentle skincare products for all, whether you have eczema or not, because again, as a consumer, it is so, so hard to know. There are a lot of hidden fragrances and preservatives that can drive inflammation. And so these are kind of common brands that we really like when we have kiddos who have sensitive skin, but anyone in general. We all have these at home. We love them. Buy stock in Costco, all of those things. On top of that, too, so you think about all the mechanisms that can strip away and lead to more of that dry barrier. So, hand dermatitis is a common thing that we see in clinic. Oftentimes, with the pandemic erupting and all of this like need for frequent hand washing, you're stripping away those ceramides and removing some of that cement that holds a brick wall really strong. And on top of it, right, like this is just what we have available at schools and in daycares are more those industrial grade detergents they can be a little bit more harsh on the skin. And so helping families understand that using maybe switching over to a sensitive based product, if they're willing and able, or if that's an option your facility can help provide for families, can be a really nice option. The Dove Sensitive Bar Soap is the only product out there that's truly fragrance free, which is like a huge like advertising like nightmare when you're looking at all these products and they're all advertised as fragrance free or unscented. Companies have really no regulation on them, and so they can hide things that actually are a fragrance if they're using it as a preservative, which can be really hard to know. But we're always happy to help you navigate what to do with these products. The other thing you can do is really leverage the moisturizer after washing the hands. And so using that moisturizer like we discussed, after kiddos are washing their hands, if their hands are still a little bit damp, apply the moisturizer right after because using that soak and seal technique is going to really like enforce and really soak in that moisture from the water as well and preventing that dry to wetness that oftentimes can lead to more dryness. And then this really gets into this whole knowledge and again, debunking this big myth that I feel like is in a lot of communities and even in medicine through a lot of our primary care provider organizations. The fact that bathing is actually a really good thing for patients, especially with eczema, but for any kiddo when we think about helping to repair that skin barrier. And so similar to like what we talked about with the hand washing, getting kiddos in the bath even once a day will help remove all of those allergens from the day. It'll moisturize the skin from soaking in the tub. And then when you get them out, have families pat dry so their skin's slightly damp and apply the moisturizer on top. It's really going to soak in that moisture from the bath, and then the moisture from the lotion or the cream is going to really soak it in to really give them great, great hydration and help make that barrier really strong. Okay. All right, and then a couple more slides here. So there's a couple kind of points we just wanted to make. It's really, you guys are doing amazing work. You guys are helping kids build that creativity. The downside is sometimes it can be irritating to kids. And so helping kids still be able to participate, do all of the things they want to do in a really great way can be really helpful. And so just being mindful for those kiddos who have bad, dry, sensitive skin on their hands, trying to, use protection like cotton gloves or cotton lined rubber gloves if they're going to be interacting with paint or slime as our nemesis in pediatric dermatology, because it has so many of these preservatives that can just lead to more inflammation and irritation. Physical activity can be huge. So heat, sweating, all of that can really drive a lot of inflammation. So as best as you can, helping kids stay cool as much as able, but not limiting their ability to participate in their activities. Obviously, you guys do a lot of really cool things with families, but having open-ended conversations can be really important if you're thinking about potential exposures and helping families navigate how to keep their child safe overall. And then I don't want to belittle these points because I feel like they're sometimes the biggest points of all. Like you guys can make a huge difference early on because kids really start to feel this sense of difference when we feel different skin conditions on our skin from even earlier times. Like I feel like we really start to see it at 3 to 4 years of age when they really start to begin to notice some of these. And so for you guys get to be with these kids from day in and day out. And so starting to have those conversations can be really important to help make them feel included and get a sense of normalcy in the way that they look when they notice differences. Oh gosh, now I'm gonna do it. There are a lot of great ways that you can help kids. So not just like talking about it is really, really important. Educating yourself, working closely with families to develop action plans if it is a kiddo who has, terrible eczema or any type of skin condition, helping them as well as you feel confident in the toolbox that you can use. And then on top of it, I feel like there's like an explosion of all of these amazing books that are children books aimed at kids and helping to understand differences, but to normalize those changes in the skin and can be a great platform for you guys to start to have that conversation together.
And we, as a specialty, really celebrate difference because although we have great targeted treatments for many conditions, we don't have them for all of them. And we do our best to make kids know and families know that difference is part of what makes the world beautiful and it's okay to be different.
Absolutely. I love that. That's beautifully said. All right, you guys. I think we have 9 minutes left for questions. I put our emails on here if anyone has any additional questions or concerns, but we are so grateful for you all being here and for the day-to-day work that you guys do. You make a huge difference. Like having a son who's in daycare, we just applaud you guys, and you guys are doing all the hard work. So thank you. And thank you to ECHC. I feel like I always want to say EHCCH, but thank you for the opportunity to speak today. We are so happy to be here.
Thank you so much to both of you. That was just delightful, and I'm sure you could see the big blast of hearts and all floating up onto your screen of appreciation there. There's a few questions that I would like to share with all of you, and I'll just say I really appreciated learning about that sunshade program. Right outside the window where I'm sitting is actually a sunshade outside this library's play area. One of the questions, do you have a suggestion for a family that's struggling for what sunscreen to purchase for their school-age student who reacts to even the baby botanical sunscreen?
That is a great question. I feel like my favorite is the Blue Lizard because a lot, again, like a lot of these products are so hard to navigate. And so using a good job of looking at the ingredient list to try to find a product that solely is zinc oxide or titanium dioxide is going to be much better tolerated than a lot of those products that do have the chemical formulations in there. And
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
ahead.
And
Yeah.
like baby botanicals, it's hard to know even from the title whether it's chemical or
Mhm.
physical. So really it's like an impossible task. We actually give all our patients a list so they don't have to ingredient read for exactly that reason. Like it's the physical blockers that are just going to be easier overall.
Sure, sure. Thank you. Could you clarify how early should one apply sunscreen before going outside?
The usual recommendations is about 15 minutes. So at least 15 minutes before you go out can be really useful and shows like better protection for absorbing
Mhm.
it.
And what's the flip side on that? Because another question is how, if it's applied an hour or more, is it still effective? Because they encourage families to apply before arriving for morning recess, and then they have to reapply for the second recess.
That's a great question. So usually like when you're outside 2 hours, so I think like your hour before is still going to get you an additional hour of protection outdoors. And I'm assuming that first recess is not lasting longer than that hour.
Yeah, it's not like the sunscreen
Yeah.
stops working when you're indoors. It just only gets you that 1 hour of outdoor protection.
Yeah.
So it's okay if they put it on at home and then you're only outdoors for
Sure,
an hour, even if it's later in the
Yeah.
day.
sure, sure. Okay. Um, how much skin exposure or well, let's talk about vitamin D. Because of course, as we know, sunlight falling on skin produces vitamin D. How are you folks advising around thinking about that?
We do not recommend any sort of sun exposure for vitamin D to, production or development because you get it in many different ways. You get it through your diet, and that risk of DNA damage is so much more riskier than going out and exposing your son to get a little bit of vitamin D. Because even the level that's produced from the skin is so much lower than like the oral intake that you actually take in your daily like supplementation through your foods and all of those things. So getting vitamin C like or vitamin D from the sun, we don't recommend.
And also, they've
Mhm.
done studies that there are many locations, including our own, where you absolutely can get enough
Yeah.
through, just outdoor exposure for like, 8 months of the year. So we just discount it and say, eat it. If patients have low vitamin D, they get supplemented, but we're generally less worried about that in the little kids.
Excellent. Um, does air conditioning cause any problems for skin?
Oh, good question. I feel like it depends a little bit on the humidity. Like there's
Yeah.
always that potential. Like the drier, like if you have an AC system that doesn't have any sort of humidity system built into it, I do think like sometimes that can contribute
Mhm.
to more dryness if you're already sensitive. And so sometimes
Mhm.
you like I put a humidifier in my room when I'm blasting the AC in the summer just to help out with feeling that sense of moisturization. I feel like sometimes a small drop in the bucket because you still need to get that moisturizer on your skin to really get that direct application to really moisturize it. But it's something to think about.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Um, this question is, if we have shade in most of our play yard, is it okay to play outside in the morning before 10 a.m. without sunscreen application or after 4 p.m.? And I have a feeling your answer will be, it depends on the shade, but
Definitely does. The level of like shaded exposure, like you're still getting exposure to visible light if it's not direct sun exposure. And so still our recommendations would still be sun protection. Like put sunscreen on no matter what if you're outside.
But
sure.
like, there are days where I'm like, ah,
I know.
on them before I send them to school. So you just do the best you can. Obviously, today it's pretty overcast, less
Yeah.
risky than in the middle of July or August.
Okay. Um, do you recommend a particular sunscreen for that's good for people with oilier or greasier skin?
That's a good question. We do, yeah. It's a little, so we like oftentimes make recommendations for acne based on looking at one that's not going to be as like acne triggering. So we find that those products kind of create less oil on the skin and can go on a little bit more eloquently. And so sometimes shopping for one that says it's non-comedogenic, meaning that it's not pore forming, can be helpful to get you in a class that I think is going to tolerate a little bit better for oilier skin. We don't
Mm,
have much issues with that early on, but with our acne prone kids, when the acne is starting to flare and all that oil production is on overdrive, we can definitely see that. They
okay.
do make some really nice tinted, like the sunscreen powders we talk about a lot.
Mhm.
It's not as much like they don't give you as much of like a true like number on the bottle. So I think the protection is a little bit more variable, but those also go on a really nicely to add that extra layer of protection. It's in a powdered form, so it's not going to feel as thick and greasy and oily on the,
Mhm.
And that's less relevant for your daycare kids,
yeah. But
potentially more relevant for all of you.
yeah.
Sure. Well, we are out of time, and I will say there's so much interest in a list of kind of products and all, and so we might follow up with you afterwards because we can share that out with those resources out with our audience. But thank you so much. This is really great. I learned some new things as well and ways to talk and think about things. I'll turn it over to Erin to close us out here.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I just want to remind you that ECHC has a number of free services, including webinars like this one. One second here. We have our podcast, Teachers, Toddlers, and Tissues, an online resource library, and one-on-one health consultation to help answer your health and safety questions. Our latest episode of Teachers, Toddlers, and Tissues is Go to Sleep. I know many of you are interested in that topic, so please check that one out. If you want to get in touch with us, you can by phone, text, email, website, or on social media. You can also scan that QR code to get in touch with us as well. Now we're going to be sharing the post-webinar survey link in the chat. The survey is available in English and Spanish, depending on your preferences. Following the webinar today, you'll get a follow-up email with a webinar recording, another copy of that post-webinar survey, and we encourage you to complete that by Monday at 5 p.m. You can expect to see your registry credit reflected in your online registry portal within 2 weeks of today. So we take a little time to verify your attendance and check out those post-webinar surveys. So there'll be a slight delay. And now we'll be sharing that link with you. And if you are on your phone, you can find that at the bottom panel. If you are watching a recording, you can also receive registry credit by completing the DCF continuing education log. You can please get in touch with us if you're